Hey guys, welcome to Joe's Java Studio. In the last video, we explored the new REST client in Spring and using that to send GET and POST requests to a certain endpoint that we have. And we also create a controller that calls the POST service methods that has the REST client implemented. So the methods we implemented were find all and create. But what if you want to find not all of the data behind an endpoint? In this case, posts. Not all posts, but find posts by ID or update a specific post or delete a specific post. In that case, you'll have to send in specific parameters to the request, and we'll explore how to do that. So let's implement find by ID method in the post service first. So this will return a post, find by ID. This will take an ID. It will return a specific post that has this ID. So here we'll do REST client dot get URI is going to be /post/ID, and then we'll pass in the ID that we got. So this ID will be replacing this ID field, and we'll retrieve the request and then turn that into a body of post.class. So basically we're mapping whatever the result we have into a post object. And then the controller, let's create a method that calls that post service method. The endpoint for this will be find by ID, and this will return a post find by ID, and it will take a request parameter. So there are two ways to pass in variables / parameters on a REST controller in Spring. One is request parameter and one is path variable. We'll be covering request parameter today, and the next video I'll cover path variable. All right. And then this will return post service find by ID. So let me quickly show you guys how do you pass in a request parameter in an HTTP request. So here we have a get request to the endpoint find by ID, and then after a question mark we pass in something that says ID equals 1. That's a request parameter with the name ID and value 1. So here we're looking for a request parameter of name ID, and it'll pick up the value from here. So let's go ahead and actually run this application. Now we get a post data with ID equals 1. If we change that to 2, we'll get another post with ID 2. Now let's go ahead and quickly implement methods for updating a specific post and deleting a post. So very similar to the other ones. Here we'll do post update. This will return a post object that contains the new post data. So REST client dot put the endpoint will be URI /posts/ID. put requests are mainly used for updating existing values. The body of this request will be the new post data that's passed in. We'll retrieve it, retrieve the result, and then map that to a post object again. And then we'll write a method that calls the service, put mapping. The path can be empty, so we'll just be calling API/posts. So if you look at here, we're just calling API/posts and then passing the request parameter. Post update. The request body will have the new post data. A request parameter will look for integer ID. Okay. And here we're just calling update, method that we just wrote. And then let's write one for delete. Delete won't return any data, so we're returning void ID of the post that we want to delete. This client dot delete, same URI /posts /ID. We'll retrieve and then turn that into a bodiless entity. We'll have a delete mapping to the original path as well. The response status, since we're not returning anything, the response status can be no content 204. The request parameter again will be integer ID. Post service dot delete. Yep, that should do it. Let's go ahead and run the application and test everything. All right, so get, we already tested. Let's do get ID1. This is the post with ID1, and then we're gonna update that post with an ID1. So once we send this, the post with ID1 has a new title and a body, and we're gonna go ahead and delete that. That returns nothing, and a 204 no content HTTP response status. All right, so that's the basics of how to take in a parameter to a request via the request parameter. And I just want to go over a few things about this request parameter. Let's say you want to name it something else here. Post ID. Post ID. But you still want, let's say the client is passing the value as ID equals 1 here. You can actually specify the name of this request parameter will be ID. So let's go ahead and run this again. That should still work. So the request parameter is still ID equals 1. And even though we changed the variable name here to post ID, that's working. All right. All right, what else? All right, sorry, I lost my notes for a bit. And we can even pass in optional request parameters. The client does not have to pass it. So let's actually make a dummy method just to show different features of the request parameter. We'll just do void void test at request parameter, and then we can wrap that in a as an optional integer ID. We'll import that. Okay. And then we're just gonna do system.out.println ID plus ID.or not provided. So what this is doing, I'll change that to a string actually for demo purposes. So what this is doing, if ID is not null, it'll return not provided. Or if ID is provided, then it'll print the ID as is. So let's go ahead and run the application. Get mapping. We'll change the path. So it says get /API/post is already taken by this method right here. So we'll just change the path to testing. Test. All right. So we'll copy this request. Get by. So this will print optional param ID. Test ID equals 1. So we printed ID equals 1, but let's say we don't pass in the request parameter here. The logs should print, it still returns a 200, but logs should print ID not provided. All right. That's one way you can implement optional parameters. And then if it's optional, you can also, well, it doesn't have to be optional, but you can set the default value of this ID. We can just set that equal to 123. Let's see what this does. So if ID is provided, it will overwrite the default value 123. If not, it'll take it as 123. So if you don't pass it, it says ID is 123. But if we do pass it, ID equals 1, it'll say ID is 1. All right. Let's say, and then you can have multiple request parameters in the method signature. But if you have too many to write them in the request signature, or you just want to have everything all at once, you can just do request param, and then you can put them all in a map. I'll just do string, and then params. Okay. So what this is doing, is we'll just print the map parameters. Okay, so let's say you have not just ID, but let's say you have name equals Joe, and then age equals 100. All right, this a random value. If we send a request, we still get a 200. Oh, we need to run the application again. There you go. If we send the request, we still get a 200. And then now the map has all the parameter values that we passed in. And yeah. And one last thing I'll show you is that we can have multiple values for a parameter. So ID, if you want to send multiple IDs, say 1, 2, 3, not just one, you can actually map that ID to a list. So list of strings, strings called ID. We'll just print the ID list. Run the application again. We'll send a request. Now we're getting all the IDs in this list. All right. There are multiple things you can do with request parameter. Some things we covered, the basics of how to pass in a value as a request parameter, how to specify the name for it. Here we're specifying the default name for it and then changing that to something readable in the code. And then how to create optional request parameters, how to map every parameter into a map, or if you pass in multiple values for a parameter, how to map that to a list. All right, so that is it for this video. In the next video, we'll cover path variable, which is another way of passing variables and HTTP requests.